So good afternoon, folks, and welcome into a joint meeting of the two government operations, not appropriations, government operations committees. We've convened again for our second Friday, and we're planning on doing this every Friday, if need be. I kind of drove things last week, so I'm going to let my House counterpart, Matt Byline, drive the bus today.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So today we are joined by Secretary of State and Deputy Secretary, Elections Director, and some others. And so the purpose of today's meeting is to get a baseline understanding of what the organ process. And so this is very much a educational experience for the committee's GovOps House, GovOps Lieutenant, and we are also joined on our screens from our colleagues in Senate Education as well. So that is the purpose and scope of work this afternoon. With that, Madam Secretary, how would you like to open things up?
Thank you so much, committees and Senate Education Committee, just in the hallway. I am Secretary of State Sarah Copeland-Hansis, and with me today is Tom Little, because what you have before you is sort of representation of the different sections of what legislative apportionment looks like. Because the Secretary of State's office supports the Legislative Apportionment Board that makes a recommendation on apportionment to the legislature. And then I also, in my former role as chair of the Government Operations Committee, chaired the apportionment process in the legislature in the last decennial reapportionment. Tom Little was the chair of the Legislative Apportionment Board. And I think before we dive into helping you understand how legislative apportionment is done, I think it's helpful to consider how school district apportionment might and probably should be different. Legislative apportionment is an inherently political process. The apportionment board is set up intentionally with partisan representation and partisan balance. I think it's worth considering how to create an apolitical, nonpartisan process for school district apportionment. And so we'll come back to maybe a little bit dissect that a little bit more after we talk about the apportionment process. But since Tom is most familiar with the LAB, the Legislative Apportionment Board, maybe he should go first and talk a little bit about how that process has worked functionally, and then I can follow up with some information about the Secretary of State's role in that.
You have to. Good afternoon, Tom Little, Shelburne, Vermont, chair of the Apportionment Board. I served in the House from 92 to 2002. When I was in the House, I was here for two legislative reapportionments, the one in 92 and the one in 2002. And then I served as chair of the Apportionment Board for the apportionment in 2011/12, and again, 10 years later. And as a reminder, it'll probably be 4 years from this summer that the governor appoints new members to a new apportionment board for the next decennial Senate census. So it's not all that far off. I don't want to distract you or freak you out about that, but it comes around sometimes sooner than you might think. So that's my experience with legislative reapportionment. The apportionment board has 7 members. It used to have 5. If 7 members, it's driven by the 3 major political parties, and major as defined in statute. So that each of the party organizations of the 3 major parties appoints 1 member to the apportionment board, and then the governor appoints 1 from each party on the governor's own choice. And then this is a trivia question. Do you know who appoints the chair? It's the Chief Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court, which I guess is sort of the non-partisan component of this. And the role of the apportionment board is to reach out to the public, reach out to boards of civil authority in particular, look at the changes in population over the prior 10 years, town by town, district by district, Senate and House, and measure the population differentials. And what we ultimately look at going to the House first is you end up, if you divide the population of the state by 150, you get the ideal number of residents in a single member district. And that's sort of that's the ideal. And then you measure the actual population of a district against that. It has either a negative deviation or a positive deviation. And the way the law has evolved is that the courts don't require exactitude, and they have been very reluctant to lay down a very specific hard and fast rule, understanding that this is to some extent the purview of the General Assembly. But a rule of thumb might be that if the district with the greatest negative population deviation were -8, for example, and one with the greatest positive deviation was a +8, the overall deviation would be 16. And I think the courts have said that something in that range is probably okay, assuming that you tried really hard to make it better. But they have never said what is the fault, when you go too far. And the role of the apportionment board is to draw up a plan for reapportionment where the districts are reconfigured as to the extent necessary to get that overall deviation down to an acceptable level. And then write a report that explains how that worked, who they talked to, what other options they looked at. We worked very closely with the Vermont Center for Geographic Information and the Agency of Commerce. They have a terrific office in terms of looking at maps. We also had a very sophisticated, too sophisticated for me, a mapping software that would look at the existing districts, and it would tell you if you moved this line from one street to another street, or from this side of the river to the other side of the river, what difference that would make. And in terms of the deviations, I could, as some of you who may know me know, I could take a really deep dive into this, and I won't right now, but that report then goes to the General Assembly. And from that point on, the apportionment board acts as an advisor or a source of information to the General Assembly and to the committees of jurisdiction. But the legislature under the law can start from scratch. It generally sometimes starts from scratch, but tends to drift back to at least parts of what the apportionment board drafted. It's a lot of work to do this. What you find is that if you see one House district or one Senate district that's got a deviation problem, say, well, we'll move this line over here or include this town with it. And that would be perfect. And then, but that affects a different district. And has a ripple effect. I thought one time I had a really, really good map. Turns out I only had 149 house districts. And I had to start over again. So, a town has, or a citizens in a town have the ability to challenge what the legislature does in the Vermont Supreme Court. A challenge like that goes directly to the Vermont Supreme Court. It doesn't start out in the trial courts. And that's in part because there's usually a real time crunch to get a final plan in place before the primary election season rolls around. But there haven't been any challenges in court. There weren't any in the last two. Shrewsbury challenged it, I think, in 92 and Montgomery in 2002, but those were not upheld by the Supreme Court. Supreme Court likes to take somewhat of a hands-off approach to it. Now, whether and to what extent that experience and the law, including the Vermont Constitution around legislative reapportionment is fundamental to the process that the committees are looking at, and whether the same constitutional mandate for substantially equal voting rights through the use of those deviations applies to the ward system that you are looking at, and if so, how? This is something that I have not tackled. And it may be that even if there isn't that type of a mandate, it may be something that out of the sense of fairness and good government, you want to do anyways. But at some point, it might be worth trying to figure that one out. I don't think there's any precedent. All of the court decisions in Vermont about reapportionment are specific to legislative reapportionment, and they don't cover any other context because they didn't have to.
Can I just interject?
Yes.
And I was part of, I think there's one other senator in the room that was part of the reapportionment in 2022. The difference here, I think, the House Government Operations Committee has jurisdiction over the House districts. And in the Senate, we had a separate committee that was formed to do that. And so am I understanding that at least there's a possibility that the 16 of us, the two committees, will be in charge of this process going forward, that it won't be completely similar to what a normal legislative reapportionment?
It could. The General Assembly could stand up another entity that would do that work. That's really up to you. This is brand new. I learned about this 4 days ago. And I've been following the work of the committees otherwise, but this narrow issue is pretty new to me. One of the other things that the VC, the Center for Geographic Information is good about is that not only do they help interpret the results of the decennial census, but they look at the interim estimated reports from the U.S. Census Bureau. And I asked last summer, I said, can you take a snapshot of the House and Senate districts as of 2024 and compare them to the 2020 census? What's shifted, if anything? Is there anything looking troublesome? And within a week, they had produced something that showed where the population is continuing to move around the state. Most of it was pretty predictable, where you would think these trends have been going on for decades. And in a couple of instances, there were some that looked a little surprising, keeping in mind that the census process is not perfect. And that there was a lot going on at the last census with COVID behavior And the census results were delayed about 6 months. The apportionment board didn't get the census results when we should have gotten them, which put us in a real bind, and then subsequently gave less time to the legislature to do its work. But I think it's an open question, Senator, whether how you do this. And I think it's driven by to what extent, what this ward system looks like and what its legal role is and what it's voting on.
Yeah, I just needed a really quick clarification. Is it your assumption then, or was that what you were saying, that the Center for Geographic Information has relatively current mapping done? 2024, did you say?
Well, they helped with the legislative district. Or they were a resource for that. I mean, the mapping for that was done using the software that the Legislative Council licensed that was also used by the Apportionment Board and the legislative committees.
It's the other half of the process that
The-
I can explain.
But the John Adams, who was the person at his group follows census estimates, and I don't know the methodology for that, so that they can tell you town by town or district by district what's been happening yearly to population. So if you needed accurate estimates to facilitate the work that you're going to do, that's available.
Great, thank you.
Senator Clarkson.
Being the other senator who worked closely with Tom and Sarah on this project and many of the rest of you of reapportionment, and we were not challenged. I have to say our work went unchallenged, which was good. I feel like that was good work. To go to Lisa's question, John and his crew will map anything, not just by census. If we wanted to do this by supervisory unions and expanding regions, if we want to do it slightly differently, they could create whatever we wanted. It is an astonishingly flexible and informed software system he has. So we could do it based on a bunch of different criteria and a bunch of different subjects. Which leads me to, I guess, my question, which is, I'm given that we're dealing with existing buildings and existing school districts and supervisory unions, and these districts affect all of them, not just politicians running for an office, which is what we were doing with reapportionment. Would it not then be wise to create a committee out of the people and the community affected by this rather than by legislators? I am not sure that this work that you're talking about, the reapportionment, should be done by us, but in fact should be done by the community who knows it best and is most affected.
That is completely a policy decision that is before you, because you're starting with a blank slate here and you get to decide. But I think you're articulating one of the things that's important to consider, and that comes back to legislative apportionment is an inherently partisan process, but school district ward apportionment doesn't have to be, and perhaps
And I
feel
think
differently.
exactly, and I think the more we do it, the more political it'll be. I think that enough said.
And one last comment is that I think it would be easy to get lured into an over-reliance on the legislative reapportionment process in law, because it's kind of fascinating and curious and quirky, but it may not be the right model at all. But we're hopeful that the Secretary's office and the Apportionment Board and Legislative Council with experience in legislative reapportionment might just be able to give you some pointers or answer questions when they come up.
So
I'm a little curious in terms of, as we're thinking, because there's sort of two different things happening here. There's districts and then there's the wards within the districts. And I don't know that I would agree that they're apolitical. I think actually school board races have been some of the most highly politicized races we've seen. And so I appreciate
Yeah,
the
most
effort
races.
to move away from that. But I'm not entirely sure we are starting with a blank slate. We're essentially erasing what we have now and building something different, but what was there
Is there?
is there.
Right.
Like we're bulldozing something to create a blank slate. So I actually think,
We don't have.
yeah, so I'm just curious, like how that interplay sort of like works both similarly and differently to the process of legislative apportionment.
I'll take that or you want me to?
I'll let you go first.
So the creation of these new school districts, there are many, many factors that need to go into that. I'm sure that you all, and particularly your finance and ways and means committees and your education committees are deeply enmeshed in trying to think of those considerations. It makes logical sense to use existing school districts to build larger districts, right? So that there is familiarity and traditional ties between communities are maintained to some extent. I think once those larger districts have been established, the way you divide up a new larger school district into voting wards doesn't necessarily have to follow the traditional school district lines. In fact, in my estimation, it should look to be as proportional as possible. So that if you have a new school district that has 5 members, that each member is representing roughly the same number of people.
And do we have a sense anywhere right now of the proportionality amongst the existing school districts? Because I think the case could be made that it does make sense to use existing school districts to the extent possible.
I don't know the extent to which school districts elect their school board members at large versus having different wards. But what I can tell you is that there is a mosaic of different size school districts, different grand lists underneath the purview of that school district, different pupil numbers that are governed by that school board. So I don't think that there's any current day way of assessing any sort of proportionality. This, because it would be bulldozing, as you say, or wiping the slate clean, is the opportunity to establish that within the school district. That doesn't mean that when you establish school districts, that the school district in my area of Vermont is going to be the same size as the one in your area of Vermont. Those may have other considerations.
And this may actually be a question for you just in terms of mapping. Is there a way to map out the school districts with the population within those districts? Because I think there is a community within a school district that exists, whether we bulldoze it or not. And so I'd be curious to see across the state what the different populations are within our existing school district lines.
Yeah, I'm confident that the VCGI could do that.
Oh.
One of the things that the reapportionment statute provides, and this echoes some language in the Vermont Constitution, is that in addition to, the rough equality of population is the main factor, but it directs the General Assembly to also take into consideration in forming district boundaries, other factors such as what those towns in that district have in common with each other, which often is a school that they share or schools
There's the
that they share.
statutory language right there.
Yeah. Recognition and maintenance of patterns of geography, social interaction, trade, political ties, and common interests. And there's also a strong compelling interest in having the districts compact and all contiguous. And that is trying to satisfy both the proportionality of population and some of those other things can be challenging, but it can be done.
I recall.
What ends up happening is you do a map or you take it at one of the new school districts, say, let's take a shot at it. Let's try to draw some lines, see what it looks like. And get the population where you want it to be within those wards. And then you look at that and you say, wow, that looks weird. Look at how we've combined those things. That doesn't look like there's these other factors of contextual factors that we would like there to be. And you go back to the drawing board and try to draw different lines. You don't want to subdivide a school district or towns in doing that unless there's no other way of doing it. Some of this just is the members who have had some experience with it. You have to start drawing a map and doing it by trial and error. And there's a lot of trial and error in this. If you simply took district number 1 and made a grid with substantially equal population and say, that's what we're going to go with because it satisfies population factor, most likely people would say, well, that's ridiculous because it doesn't recognize the local factors in these. You want these wards to have something in common within them other than just population.
Did I see Henry? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you so much for coming today and presenting to us. I think what my main question, kind of going off what Senator Clarkson was asking, was this took a lot of time every year we did it. And we only did it every 10 years. And I have concerns that we as a legislature do not have the capacity or time to endeavor to articulate this project successfully when you compare it to the amount of work you had to do after we had been practicing doing it every decade for a long time. So I want to ask, knowing your experience with redistricting, how long do you think a reasonable amount of time would be to work on a project like this to get it right? I don't know, because it seems like it took a full year of legislative time from start to finish with years in advance prep, setting people in a leadership position to do it with multiple key stakeholders, with a starting review committee coming back. That took a long time. And I'm wondering if as you look at this project now, how long is a reasonable amount of time for us to take on it to do it correctly in your vision? When I look at it, it doesn't look like it's a 4-month legislative session timeline. And
And we have 2.5 months left.
yeah.
Well,
When in the last time around, the apportionment board delivered its final report in the end of November of 2021. And we supplemented that because of we have a deadline, I think a statutory deadline. So the legislative committees had from December 1 of 2021 to whenever you adjourned with the final votes, which would have made a total of 6 months, 6.5 maybe. And that's the legislative committees build on the work of the apportionment board.
Can I just put a pin in that?
Mhm.
I think the question for you all is, do you want this school district apportionment committee to mirror the legislative apportionment board, where they're coming back and giving you a recommendation and then you do some form of throwing it all up in the air and starting over from scratch? Or do you, as a legislature, want this process to bring us a plan that fits the various criterion of proportionality and honoring geographic ties? By the way, I think you need to also make sure that municipalities are kept whole within those school districts. And in that case, if the majority of the work is assigned to a school apportionment committee, you wouldn't have that long and detailed process that in 2021 and 22 took about 6 months' time.
Okay, I really appreciate you framing that up as, I think based on that, I think that if we were just deciding what took less time to do this effectively, I think it would be the latter suggestion you make, by giving more authority to a reapportionment committee. That would just be my summary of your point.
Well, but also, Tom, I'd love to have you give all the new members a notion of how much time the reapportionment committee came out at spend creating that final report that came to us in November of 21. Because that took time too, and that was part of the work.
I think the governor finished appointing the members to the board by September or October of 2019. So we got organized by the end of that year and worked through 2020 and into 2021. But there was a big chunk of time there where we didn't work because we didn't have census data. And one other function of the process is that there's a point in the process where proposed district, doesn't happen in the Senate, it happens in the House. Proposed plans go out to the Board of Civil Authority in all of the towns, and they get a chance to comment, criticize, make counter proposals. A lot of them take advantage of that. They often focus just on their community, as you might imagine. That is another significant chunk of time. I think it was about 3 months during that whole process that may not need to be replicated in this scenario.
So that would be in our parallel, would be having school districts that currently exist potentially respond to the creation. To give them time. That's a layer I had not considered.
Yeah, no, we're finding new layers. Passing day, Representative Pisnell.
As a community who tried to, in the past year, talk about consolidations and closing a couple of schools, and different towns pitting against each other in smaller school districts, I think it would be more imperative if the directive came from the legislative body versus giving it to the community to decide where you want your school districts drawn. I think it would have more, it's going to upset people, obviously. But when you start asking the community to say, where do you want your town lines drawn for school districts, it's going to be more contentious. And I think it would have more bite to it if it came from a mapping committee that knows.
Perhaps, but one way of approaching it would be with a very limited time frame is to put it out to the constituent school boards in a new school district and say, can you see if you can come together on something? Keep in mind, you got to do the population bit. You've got to try to keep like districts associated with other districts. And I mean, you could either do that at the beginning or halfway through. You could say, this is the tentative plan. What do you think?
Right. That's sort of what you did. That's what you do. Final report. They gave us a document to work.
I've just started really thinking, as I said, about in the last week or so, and it may be useful to just take up a piece of paper and a pen or a laptop and say, okay, let's assuming we're starting on June 1st. How long is it going to take to do this bit, this bit, this bit? And can it be done in the ordinary course of the General Assembly's business? How much can you do in 2022 session? Can you do all of it in the 2025 does some of it have to be done now? Do you have to follow up next year? If you did the districts this year, could you do the wards next year? And then would you be voting on when's the actual budget work going to be done? Sure, you're way ahead of me on this, but one way to start is to say,
Just one second, right? So one of the things that was bouncing around in my head also was whether or not there needs to be, yes, we're looking at population, we're looking at student population, but also just like brand list play into it as well. And like, I don't know if you have an answer to that, you probably don't, but that was just something that had to be bouncing around in my head.
Is it Graham?
Grand list,
Oh.
because we're looking at how.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
That is a question for consideration when you think about what your districts will look like. And so I wouldn't say that that has as much to do with the wards within the district because you will be electing people to sit on the school board for that school district.
Can I just ask a question, Ben?
We had a question over.
After me.
Who in the-
Do you think that it could be beneficial for all of us to add Monday to the legislature? I don't mean to be flippant, but
No.
it's abundantly obvious that we should be doing.
No comment.
Yeah.
I think it.
No, there's a lot of, that's a valid, I mean, that is a valid question.
Yes, it's
We have-
I think it depends on the timeline and how aggressive it really is going to be.
We're on bar.
Who's gonna do it?
Just saying.
Point taken.
I do think that at some point, depending upon how the districts are, what the boundaries of the districts are and the boundaries of the wards are, that there could be Brigham type implications there if at least the perception is that the wards in a the wards of, if certain wards in a district, or maybe the district itself has predominantly towns or school districts with grand lists on the lower end of the scale. And if the way the actual results of the school budgeting process work seems to go contrary to the meaning and the requirements of Brigham. That might take some time to play itself out, but I think sort of lurking in the background here is the potential for Brigham. I should also say that I think Brigham has not been tested much. And it could be, I almost, speaking from only for myself, almost see as a test of Brigham coming out of this whole process, as somebody will have one or more stakeholders will feel that this is a violation of at least of the intent of Brigham and the public benefits clause of the Vermont Constitution, and take a shot at an appeal. And I think it would be maybe naive to think that that's not out there, but it could take a while for that to play out. All right.
Senator White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, so going back a little bit to what Representative Byron was bringing up around brand lists. When you do redistricting, do you factor in does the cultural part extend to the wealth of the community? I mean, when we did, okay.
No.
I
but
mean,
the culture-
that's, well, that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So you don't necessarily have experience with trying to manage how income of a community would impact the district. And when I think about school districts, so we have no experience with that. That's like a whole new realm to this, which, thank you. I had not totally thought that through, but what we see in other states is wealthy schools, wealthy town, because property, this is the basis of our whole setup.
The whole problem with Brigham, the Brigham challenge.
Yeah, so we don't have necessarily a good example with this. to try to have wealth distribution. But is there anything that you would point us to that we have had good experience with nationally or setting up districts based on income? Wait, I want to hear what Anne's saying. Because I guess my point is, my main concern with the school districts, however they're set up, is you put all the poor towns in one district and all the wealthy towns in another district. And then you end up with what has happened in every other single state where they have it based on the property taxes of your town impact your school. And then you get poor, it's the whole point of this. So do we have a creation of districts in other places, in other states that have done this? It's not an analogy to reapportionment, I guess is what I'm hearing. So we don't have that.
I think it's more likely that in other states there is, well, the other states may not have the state constitutional common benefits clause in a Brigham decision, but they may have a financial mechanism to do adjustments or reconciliations in those scenarios where the low income, low grand list towns all clustered together, which is what you have in Vermont, frankly. You're going to end up with wards that compared to another ward have significant differences in grand lists and income and other factors. The non-population factors are not core to the apportionment process. They're significant, but they're not the ones that determine whether the plan passes muster under the Vermont Constitution. What the apportionment board typically does is to try to come up with a map that satisfies the population requirements. And then if you read the apportionment board reports, we have a few paragraphs that address these other factors and try to say why, in fact, the towns in this district do have something in common, or historically, it may only be that they've been in the same house district for the most part for 60 years and they've become, they have that in common. They may have a school district in common. They may be on the same side of the mountain. I remember the Shrewsbury fight was when Senator Collimore probably remembers this. The Shrewsbury, which was a Rutland County town, had always been in a Rutland County House district. That year, it was put into a House district with Ludlow. And
It's the marriage of two counties.
and
Please, you can.
that didn't make the people in Shrewsbury happy. But you strive for something very, very good that is not achieving perfection. And I am not current or conversant with the proposals being discussed for how the actual funding and the revenue generation would work. So I really can't comment on that.
So, yeah, just to somewhat answer your concern, if the governor's proposal is accepted or worked on, there's a foundation formula included in that where everybody has to start at, it's $13,200. Weighting considerations, English learning, that kind of thing, add that so that at some point there's a figure for that community. If over-resourced communities want to add to that, there's also a provision which would allow state money to flow into the under-resourced districts to sort of make things a little bit more equal. I just throw that out there as somewhat of an answer. I know it's not probably a perfect one.
Can you explain to me, thank you, that's really helpful. So how would that not kind of like compound on itself over time? That like if Norwich just said, we're always over-resourced, we're always going to invest in our elementary school, we're always going to do that. And Hartford said, we literally don't have the money to do that. We do not have resources. How would that not like compound over itself without having Hartford and Norwich be in the same district?
I believe there's also a cap involved that at some point you can't spend more than X.
Fire department.
But we're in the weeds, I think,
Yeah.
and probably out of our
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess I got Senate Education over.
Well, yeah, that's great. And I also wanted to, Deputy Secretary Hibbert did a great job with the document we all received on the 13th of February. I just wanted to be clear that it is, and we're looking for guidance from the Secretary of State's office. Is this sort of mapping and districting the most important thing, the first thing that this group should be doing? Or are there other things which rise to that level? If you can help us out. I mean, we talked about school boards and we talked about budget and we talked about a lot of other things. But to me, the districts have to take, it's sort of like somebody mentioned, it's like trying to cook a dinner without knowing the ingredients. And I thought that was a rather apt description. So in many ways, we just need some guidance as to what, in what order and what the process should be that we should be focused on.
That's a big question, and I'm honored to be asked, because the ball is in your court and you get to decide. However, I know that the jurisdiction of the Government Operations Committee is different and distinct from your education committees and your Finance and Ways and Means committees. And so it occurs to me that Finance and Ways and Means and Education committees are going to need to be a part of thinking about what those district lines look like. The Education Committee is experts in the education realm. The Finance and Ways and Means are experts in the grand list and taxing capacity of the different parts of the state. You could be thinking about how you establish the apportionment process. Because, and there are some other considerations that I would love to put in front of you. There's another part of the proposal as it came from the governor that I think these committees would be uniquely situated to give some recommendations on. And that is how the local advisory councils are established. The governor's plan, as I understand it, recommended those be sort of related to a school building. So not a school district as it sits now, not a larger school district, but that each building might have a school advisory council that could be made up of members of the community, members of the faculty, members of the student body, members of, extracurricular leaders, community members, whatever. You could spend some time thinking about how those local advisory councils work, because I think that Vermonters are going to want to have assurances that they will still be able to have some form of influence and care and feeding of their school. And when you take away these smaller school districts and make a larger school district, that loss of influence will be keenly felt. And so I think this committee would be ideal to think about how those local advisory bodies are established.
If I remember correctly too, Lauren said that if we could find another word except for advisory.
Oh, we need to be careful of that. If they are truly advisory, you can leave that in there as far as we're concerned. But remember that open meeting law does just draw a distinction between a body that truly has no decision-making abilities and one that does. And if these local advisory or local school councils have decision-making authority.
Budgetary, just.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think these districts, I think we need to begin in many ways with what are the districts? And I know our education committees are looking at this too. Our superintendents have, and what is the natural criteria that is the top priority as we look at creating a community? Because all a district is a bigger community, a bigger school community. And so I think a natural, I think we have to sort of start there, which is what is the natural community we're creating, even if it's larger than our currently smaller natural community that is our school. We've all gone through Act 46 and we all know the effort that took and the process that resulted in where we are now. And I really think we have to invest in I don't disagree with Sandy. I think that the local will be a challenge, but we have to give it some time to do some initial preliminary work and contribution. So I think our creating a body that would pull together those communities, those natural communities that already exist, those school communities that naturally exist, how we regionalize them and naturally then build the districts or the regional districts, I would call them. And districts is so harsh, but I mean, I think we all can envision regionalization of our schools. I think we all cottoned on to the fact that we aren't going to be able to keep the high quality education we want unless we regionalize some of our high schools. We're not going to be able to keep 2 or 3 languages, a number of sciences, all the arts, and with a smaller and smaller high school population. I think we all get that. So helping power the growth of that natural community and power that thinking beyond itself and thinking more regionally, and then building on that to create the districts, we have to start somewhere and we empower to help launch that conversation. I'm thinking out loud, so I apologize for it being so wordy. But so I do think an umbrella like and we need the right word for it, but until we have the right word, the reapportionment, a redistricting commission that would bring maybe legislators, but mostly the people who are invested currently in our natural school communities, bringing them together to do this initial work, make a recommendation with this redistricting group. And then that work would then lead to a recommendation to the legislature as to what those districts would be statewide.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm getting the sense we're not going to get a proposal on how to do this from the governor. So we should probably be beginning to draft legislation to start a process to do this.
Right.
So where would you direct a committee member to move this process forward? Or is it appropriate for us to ask the chairs to start a committee bill in one or the other chambers to begin looking at a process? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be the one that Senator Clarkson just outlined, but I think creating the bone structure for what we're talking about would be extremely helpful at this moment. And I'm not necessarily hearing that we're going to get one from the administration like we perhaps have gotten with other parts of the proposal. So I either want to know, should I wait or should we act? And how would you like us to act? And I think that's a decision for you two, but I'm ready.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the government. So I think that what we're doing right now is getting a better understanding of what the scope of work is gonna look, right? Like we've all been like hypothesized.
Yes.
And this is the first like formal conversation on what the most functional structure that we have in government to overlay this project to, because it is not a clean, right? So in my mind, this meeting here is for us to get a better understanding of that scope of work, so that we can refine that decision sooner than later. Does that make sense?
Yes. So what would you say if I said, I really love what Senator Clarkson just said? Can I start that? Can I ask legislative council, and which legislative council person should I ask? Or do you want me to not do that because there's something else happening that I should wait on my hands?
What are you gonna do?
I would love to start writing language that would put forward the possibility of us creating an outside group that starts to present a proposal for the type of and size of districts. Basically, I really like what Allison said. I'd love to just do that essentially,
And
but
then-
I can put my own flavor on it. I just don't want to start the process of working with legislative council.
Maybe
Yes.
So I think the best thing to do right now is to like put that down as one of the potential paths that we take. And
Okay.
we can structure a couple of different paths, right? I'd rather have, like, we all have the same destination, we gotta figure out which road.
Yeah.
So right now, we're mapping out various roads to get to the same destination. I think that is one of the ones that we can put off a consideration.
Okay, and I guess
But
to,
I don't think putting a draft request in right now would be the most prudent use of legislative council time. Until
okay,
we can hone this choice in.
I'm not
Representative
gonna-
Stone, then Representative Hoover.
I'll go last. I'm going to change the subject.
Okay.
Okay, I don't even know how to say this eloquently. I'm just kind of confused how this is the scope of our practice as far as our committee jurisdiction, especially because this is part of not yet running legislative language that is yet to go through the education or finance committee. So in my opinion, I feel like we're jumping the gun a bit and we're kind of in over our head. I don't know what the right
We're over
word
our
is.
skis, out over our skis.
That's right. It's very, yes.
Pregnancy.
So that's not really a question, but just a point of confusion, I guess.
You know, and one of the reasons we wanted to do this today was, like I just said, the legislative reapportionment is the closest thing that we do as a body, committees, to what is being laid out here, right? So this is just getting a sense of what a structure may or may not look like. And then we just hone that stuff in later and then figure out with, leadership and other committees, how this workload gets.
A lot of this language has not gone through the finance and education committees yet. So I just really want to reiterate that. Okay.
Representative Pango, and then Senator Bowles.
Thank you. So to answer you, Representative Stone, and maybe make you feel a little bit better about this, if we were to be asked to do this, or when we would be asked to do this, we will have done the background work by learning what our jurisdiction consists of and how it's been done in the past to the nearest situation, the closest situation to this, because this has never been done before. So the closest situation is what the Legislative Apportionment Board has done. So we are all learning about that because most of us have not served during a reapportionment in the past. So here we are today.
I hear and actually share Representative Stone's concerns. I did sit through reapportionment and I do appreciate learning the process and all of that, but I, to your point, don't think that we can possibly make legislation if we don't know what we're legislating to, which is why I brought up last time that perhaps we need to advocate to our colleagues that this change needs to be pushed out so that they can do what they're going to do. And then we have the time to respond with the election strategy to do that. Whereas right now, we have two trains barreling down the track. Neither train is speaking to each other. We don't know if they're going to crash. We don't know if they're going to go in different directions. Sorry. But we're trying to build something, but we don't even know what we're building. And so to your point, I brought this up last time, and I again think we may need to advocate to those doing the education work that we actually can't make the transition until we know what we're transitioning to.
Senate Education's on.
Well,
I was just gonna say that.
and we have a
That
member.
would be helpful to
Yeah.
see if there's anyone in the other room that.
Oh, are we doing a joint meeting?
Well,
With them listening, I assume they can speak.
if they want.
Oh, they unmuted.
You're not,
you're not.
hear you.
So we just mostly, this is Senator Baumgart, so we mostly just wanted to listen in, get a feel for how the complexities that might be associated with developing the wards after the district is grown, because they're really two totally, on one level, two totally different processes. The first is the termination of the districts, and that's something we've been spending a lot of time on in this committee and beginning to think through. And then the questions that I think will be most pertinent for the GovOps committees will be figuring out how to do the wards within those districts. So, but we, for our purposes, wanted to understand all the complexities as well. So this has been a helpful hour so far.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Representative.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that's very helpful. We also have to consider what they're discussing in House Education. I think right now, minimum versus maximum class sizes is a guiding variable to their conversation, however quickly their train is moving. I think both Senate and House Education should consider defining local control in the various places it may or may not exist. I'd be curious if the secretary would be willing to, do you have any opinions on local control, or is that?
I sure do, but they're mine and mine alone. Not, this has nothing to do with the Secretary of State's office. I think that local control is a fiction in Vermont. I think that Vermonters care very deeply for their local school district and their local school building. And I think there's very little control that you have as a school board member on your local school district right now. I think that you could improve local control with a thoughtful combination of broader school districts and local school advisory or local school councils. Where
Okay.
decisions could be made about, would we rather invest in a new playground, or would we rather, repave the parking lot with the money that we have for our school building, for instance?
Thank you.
Representative Morgan, I see a hand before? No, okay. Senator Clarkson.
So Seth and company down the hall, when did you tune in? Did you hear Tom Little's presentation about the reapportionment model
Yeah, they've been here the whole time.
I didn't know that because I hadn't seen them on screen. Yep. Okay, so you've been with us the whole time. Great, I hadn't realized we were having a joint meeting. I mean, I knew we were having a joint meeting, but not a super joint meeting. A regionalized joint meeting.
One other historical footnote is that the General Assembly only did legislative redistricting after a series of 2 or 3 U.S. District Court decisions in Vermont. The federal judges in Vermont mandated it. Going back into the early 1830s, when the Vermont Council of Censors was still in office before the Senate was created, there were efforts made then to redistrict the House districts that never, and it periodically would come up again because of concerns about voting rights and proportionality. It didn't happen until the federal courts, taking their cue from the U.S. Supreme Court, said, you got to do it. And they actually gave a relatively tight deadline in Vermont. There was an off-year election. So there were members elected to the House in 64. They were elected again in 65 with the new districts, and again the following year. And then the General Assembly did another redistricting in 71, 72, and again later that decade. And then it was in 82, it got back on got onto a regular track. And I bring that up mainly to note that it could take some time to get this right. And there could be some changes that you learn while you're going. And the first model might not be perfect, but doesn't mean you shouldn't go with it.
Thank you, Tom.
I see Senator Robbinsdale is on and has her hand up.
Thank you. And I hope people can hear me. I have a slightly sick, sleeping baby near me. And I came in a little bit late, but I just wanted to say, as a party of one on Senate education, perhaps, there are just so many important governance questions beyond the redistricting and reapportionment piece that I still think the GovOps committees, as someone who used to be on Senate GovOps, will have an interesting role to play in those questions. Number one being, if we were to create very large districts, these would be some of the most powerful positions in the state, some of the biggest areas of representation after our statewide candidates, if we went on the larger side. And, that always brings up questions and concerns about who has access to run for those seats and how, political it becomes. We'd be going from one school board member for every 75 kids to, 5 school board members for 35,000 kids if we listen to the governor's presentation, which is a huge shift. And it's a huge shift in how we think about the democracy of our school districts. The second thing that's really important, I would say to me on the education committee about how we reapportion, is that what we saw by happenstance with the 5 district creation is that there's more equal property wealth in each of those districts. We could potentially recreate that with other size districts as well. But right now, the property wealth difference in the state is up to 11-1 between essentially Chittenden County and the Northeast Kingdom when you go from district to district. But in the new plan, it's more like 2-1. And then we'd be thinking about how to, I think we'd have to then be thinking about, and it's in the proposal, how we equalize those property wealth disparities still. So anyway, I just wanted to say, I think there's a number of really rich governance questions that we could use thought partners with as we move forward, because I remember what it was like to be on Senate Government Operations, and you do think about these kinds of governance questions more often in more contexts. And, I just think I wouldn't sell yourselves short. I may not start writing a bill necessarily, with how Ledge Council is feeling right now, but I think this is really valuable, and I just wanted to add my 2 cents.
And Keisha, did you hear Matt's and Becca's conversation about property wealth and grand list? Or did you hear that? Because we did.
I may not
Okay.
be on yet.
Because we did begin that sort of equity issue of property wealth and how do we apportion appropriately? Or if it figures.
The list of hypotheticals is seemingly endless. Yes. Any other hands?
I'm just curious, Mr. Chair, do you think, well, after we're done with them, are we gonna have a general discussion of any kind? Is that gonna be maybe? Is that kind of?
Do you have any other material or comments to continue with, or?
The only other functional part of the apportionment process that I think the legislature should be aware of is that the mapping software that was used by the House and Senate and would presumably need to be used by this school apportionment committee was a license that was, I think, purchased by Legislative Council. And during that process, as Tom alluded to, this software is pretty technical. And so the legislature actually hired a mapping technician as well. And so as you think about what functionally you might need to put into doing award apportionment process in the off session, a mapping technician and the license for the software would be key.
Remember that.
I know.
So I just add to that the software has changed a lot, and who knows whether even in the last 4 or 5 years, there may be something new out there that is more user-friendly that everyone could use, at least at some level of detail, to do some mock-ups of what these districts and wards would look like. I hope.
I know I asked this last time, but now that you bring up the mapping software and the mapping technician, when you were having those conversations with Legislative Council, did you by chance lay your hands on what the cost of those licenses and that technician were?
No, I don't recall hearing what the cost was.
It was the Legislative Council purchased a limited number of licenses, meaning that not everyone who wanted to play with the software was allowed to do it. That's just the way the software game was being played, at least at the time. one of the members of I think two members of the apportionment board did find another alternative software that they used. But ultimately, we had to convert everything into the software that the Ledge Council had, because that's what was going to be useful to the legislature.
Recall you made appointments with the technician if you had ideas, and we would build maps together. So I do recall sitting with them, building maps.
It wasn't that expensive, was it?
It would just be nice to know the number.
Yeah,
No,
but, I mean, just the 10-year, I mean, well, it isn't quite 10 years, is it? It's only, yeah, it seems like it was an age ago.
3 years.
Right, but we did it in 21, 22, 21.
They started in 21 with the mapping software, right? And then we
began in December. And then we had new districts by the time we ran in 22. We finished in May of 22.
Correct.
So I think the question we have before us is, how do we ramp up to, and so that we can create a runway for this, create a runway for these decisions, and who do we empower to get us to navigate us through each one of those runway segments. So
I would humbly offer that somebody in the legislative realm is going to be the traffic police in terms of which committee does what and who does what when. Our intent with bringing these ideas to you is that you can be working on the arteries and the fingers while somebody else is figuring out the spine. And so I would humbly suggest that if you think that you're going to want to apportion these new school districts by population, that you begin to build that process and then and also at the same time work on what those local school councils look like.
right. So I think our challenge with doing it just on you're going to have to do it as a blended thing, because we have already existing schools and school communities and natural communities that, and so we're gonna have to blend that work with population. So it's gonna have to be a blended, unless we want to just spend hundreds of millions of dollars building new schools that fit just a population reapportionment. Do you know what I mean? And we're gonna have to blend it to make it work.
I understand what you're saying, but I think we're talking about different things.
So you're just talking about voting.
I'm talking about how do you, as government operations committees, envision the creation of wards within a larger school district?
So
However many there are, 5, 12, 15. What are the factors that you would want that apportionment committee and that apportionment process to weigh over and above the population proportionality? Maybe you do want there to be a significant weight given to traditional ties.
Is that powers and duties? Powers and duties of these wards, is that what you're talking about?
No, I was saying that as you are creating an apportionment process for the school district boards, you can direct that committee to focus on certain criterion. And the traditional criterion for legislative apportionment has been preservation of existing political subdivisions, recognition and maintenance of patterns of geography, social interaction, trade, political ties, and common interests, could be existing school districts, and use of compact and contiguous territories. That's what the statute says should be considered when legislative districts are apportioned. You can establish what you think the priorities should be as school district wards are being created.
Representative Waters.
I had a question that piggybacks on hers, which is, So speaking of the fingers and the arteries and our metaphor here, we know that like our finger is the elections. We know that's happening, correct? Within this group of people who are sitting at this table, that's our jurisdiction. The map drawing and the districts and all of these other things and the wards and the school districts, that's up to a group of people who is not necessarily us at the moment. Correct? Like it hasn't been decided yet who's making those decisions. The one thing we know for sure that we have to do is the elections portion of it, correct? Like that is definitely within our purview. So if we're talking about a roadmap and if we're talking about making plans and setting the stage or wherever we're doing for the future, maybe the next thing we could talk about, because we probably don't have time for it right now, but I'd love to get just at least some opinion or guidance about what that would look like as far as in the context of what we've been talking about today, about how that plays into like the elections aspect of it, which is the GovOps nitty gritty of it.
We would be happy to share as far as what we know the proposal to be, how you would want to structure the election side of that. So I'd be happy to come back and talk about that another.
Yeah.
Senator Hinsdale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One more question that I don't think has been asked from trying to check in about that. And I don't know if this is partially an institutions question and partially a GovOps question, but I know both of you have, an incredible amount of experience on all fronts. I keep thinking about the challenges of the voting and the regulatory requirements that are going to need to be met to either acquire or shed real estate in these new districts. So, we often hear about, okay, well, the town took a vote to transfer this school building from ownership of the district to ownership of the town. We could be doing that on a massive scale. And I don't know if there's a standard way we'd be supporting districts to do that, or how, this will get extremely complicated. And when will that need to come up? And how will the larger districts potentially take a vote on something that might have been originally one town's purview?
Oh, nice.
I wasn't trying to answer Senator Ron Hinsdale's question. I just want to be like, I don't want to answer that question.
We're clear to deal with it.
Okay. Well, then I have another question that still hasn't been answered to me, and that is the constitutionality of having a school board position that is doing the same elected role that represents a different number of people. We have a constitutional provision around one person, proportional representation. And so this idea that we're going to have different sized districts with the same number of wards, therefore someone elected to a school board position might represent 1,000 voters, might represent 10,000 voters. I am not convinced that's constitutional. And I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that, or if we need to bring in one of the constitutional experts from legislative council, but I still can't wrap my head around how that works.
So I think Tom alluded to this a little bit at the beginning of his consideration of this, and he's more of the legal expert than I am, but neither of us are aware of any court cases that would shed light on constitutionality of school districts as they currently exist. And since we don't know what the new ones are going to look like, it would be beyond my ability to predict whether there could be a constitutional challenge. I think when undertaking something as monumental as the school restructuring that you're undertaking, I think it's going to be important to get as much information as you can and to do the best that you can with that information to do what's right. And court cases will come if they come, and you can only do the best with the information that you have.
Yeah, I don't know whether, Senator, whether the proposal from the administration for the 5 districts and their boundaries came with it with a description or an explanation of the number of people residing in each of those districts and why those boundaries were chosen. Did they follow existing school district, county, or town lines or something? But maybe more to your question, Senator, what does it look like if you've got a 5-person board in District A has a district with 120,000 people and a 5-member district and member board in District B that has 39,000 people in it? I don't know whether that's been addressed there. And as I said in my opening remarks, I think because someone needs to take a swing at that constitutional issue. It may not be an easy one to track down.
I'm not an attorney, nor am I a constitutional expert, but my layperson's read of the Constitution doesn't pass muster to me. So I think you're right. We do need an answer before we make blatantly unconstitutional boards.
Representative Morgan, I see your hand up.
Yes. Yeah. How do I politely say this? I'm a military guy. I'll be blunt. We have a mission here. Okay. We work in terms of missions. Our mission is to reform education. Is it not this session? Shouldn't that be a priority?
Right. Say this session, we're getting started, but to reform, yes.
Right.
Not this sort.
But we need some top-down driven leadership, and I don't know where that should come from. Should it be from the speaker, the Senate pro tem? Should it be all from the governor? But we've got to have, and I'm not, it's one on leash on me and go, oh, you're full of it and whatever, you're crazed, whatever, that's fine, or you feel people's feelings get hurt. But I once had an old boss say to me, come to me with how you're going to get the mission accomplished. Stop telling me that you can't do it, or there's too many factors of why we can't do it, because that gets old and we don't get anything done. We don't get off ground at 0. And again, maybe that's my mission focus from being in the military for 38 years. But we get given, there's your mission, accomplish it. And then you figure out how to get there, not how you can't get there. Or we got this variable, we got that variable, we got this, oops, we got that. And then maybe I'm oversimplifying, but I think until we have, the governor proposed 5 districts. If there's an alternative out there that people would rather see it be, I'll pick a number, Jan or time earlier, I said, maybe it's a dozen, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 7. But until I think we've got to at some point draw the line in the sand and go and throw down and do it, because we're going to be sitting here 10 Fridays from now doing the same drill and we'll have gotten nowhere. And I'm very dismayed by that fact, because I know my voters told me in November, that's what they're looking for. They're upset. They're mad. I said this in the subcommittee on Thursday mornings. Anybody else in that committee with me on Thursday mornings that sits in there with me? Said that last week at it. I feel like we're treading water. I really do. Maybe I'm wrong for feeling that way. And I'm not blaming anybody in this room. I'm not blaming anybody specifically, but collectively, if we don't get off the dime and get moving and move out and start marching forward to my military vernacular, we are wrong. And I don't mean to be that blunt, but I'm going to be. And I've been sitting here holding my tongue and I'm just said it. Sorry, but we've got to, because you know, the old saying, the journey of 10,000 miles or wherever the heck the mileage is starts with the first step. And I feel like because I'm hearing in the building, tap the brakes. Well, untap the brakes, tap the brakes, tap. I mean, whoa, wait a minute. Somebody's got to put their foot on the damn accelerator and start moving, because I feel like we're at mile marker 0.0 still. And I'm sorry to be that blunt, but that's how I feel. I really do. And I know, I don't know if anybody, does anybody else sense that frustration?
That
frustration?
That's what I was trying to ask earlier.
I think everyone's nodding.
Yeah, I mean, and so we need, in the military, we need leadership on that. And I'm not saying it's anybody in this room. I'm not blaming I'm not blaming any particular officer or person, but when I say we need leadership, who, at some point, somebody's got time to throw down, time to, if 5 isn't the governor's recommended, that's not the answer. Somebody needs to go with, well, here's what it is. And then those entities need to get together and go, okay, it's 12, it's 11, it's 7, it's 6, it's 12, it's whatever. And it's making my head explode. And I'm sorry, but that's how I feel. I feel that frustrated right now because on town meeting day, you know what we've got to give to the voters? Nothing. We got zip. And that very frustrates me because I felt we could have had something by now. And I'm sorry if anybody in here feels hurt, offended, or but whatever, but that's how I feel. And I'm extremely frustrated.
I appreciate you speaking your piece, Colonel.
Karen.
I'm gonna agree with Mike, because after last Friday's meeting, all I could visualize is us coming into a room with a great big clear map of the state of Vermont with 5 districts drawn in it. And here's how we're gonna divide up the boards. And if 5 districts don't work because of the population in certain areas, well, then we're gonna go to 6 or 7, but we gotta start somewhere. And maybe that's old school. It's like the old mimeograph machine, it's like overlays. Okay, so this is what the state of Vermont looks like now with counties. This is where the career development centers are. Now we put we just keep layering it as stencils until we get
AOT districts.
Yes. Until we get to where it looks like it's workable. And that's all I can envision is this big clear map with different color coding but yeah, I think we gotta get going. And if it means we have to make a decision to okay, let's pick the map, let's start with mapping and get going and see where it lays and then start worrying about legislation and everything else that follows afterwards. But let's at least see what the picture looks like.
So, if I can jump in quickly, Mr. Chair, we're gonna sign off. We're gonna sign off because we've got our own committee work to do. This has been really helpful. And thank you for allowing us to listen.
Yep. No, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
I just asked Seth, before you go,
Yeah.
have you seen a map of all the supervisor unions?
Yes.
Do you have a map? Have you mapped out all the supervisor unions? I'd love to start with that.
No, we have been setting ourselves up to do that, but we have not seen a map. We haven't seen a map different than anybody else has with the 5 districts as initially proposed.
Can I just want to say, kind of to support my chair in Senate Education, so people don't think we're not thinking about this question. It's definitely a major education policy consideration, what the right number of students is in a school district when you get economies of scale, when you get diseconomies of scale. How superintendents feel about their ability to have influence, how parents feel about their ability to engage. So I just, we could just draw things on a map. That might be your job, but the size of a school district is something we're talking about daily.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
I think that when I think to use your metaphor of a mission, I think it would be important that we agree we're on the same mission first. I heard from my voters that the money for some voters was more than they could pay. And we can certainly address how we pay for schools to address immediate tax relief while doing our due diligence to make sure that we are not destroying our public education system. To the Secretary of State's point, this is a monumental change, and to just slam on the gas and hope for the best doesn't seem prudent. And so I think when I hear what my mission is, it is to provide property tax relief for Vermonters who need it most. It is not necessarily to completely change the landscape of public education. And if we are going to make changes, they should be thoughtful. They should be informed by data. They should be informed by best outcomes. And to Senator Rom Hinsdale's point, by where we actually gain and don't lose. And I don't think we do that by blindly slamming on the gas pedal.
As to the commentary provided by our resident town clerk, it was always going to be mapping. That's going to get us forward. And I think the truest thing that Mr. Little said today is it's trial and error. It's going to be trial and error over and over. So we don't have to slam on the gas. We also don't have to touch the brakes.
So I propose that we actually see if John still runs BCA.
So
I think so, great. Awesome. And his wife. I think we might actually ask for a map of the supervisory unions and see how they look together. Because those are natural communities that have already been formed. Those are our natural school communities that exist. Let's map them. Let's see what they look like together. And perhaps they might suggest to us some natural districts. Because I don't think, and I don't know, maybe House Ed has already done this. I just don't know. But let's start with that. I mean, it might be, and then I also think so just to start visualizing what the mission, the mission is. The other thing I would like us to be further thinking about is how we can use the process we have in place in statute. Reapportionment is, wish I could come up with but it's like a regionalization board, or, I think what we're doing is creating bigger regions. So it's sort of like a regionalization board that we would put together. But if you, Tom and Sarah and Lauren and Sean, give a little more thought to how we could integrate, how we could empower, how we could get, how we develop that runway to the mission's conclusion. Because every takeoff needs a good runway.
Very clear instruction.
Because I think we do need to start with some local engagement, and then at some point hand it to a board that will look at it with objective eyes and come to us with an objective recommendation. So I think there is this, but we need to design, to go to your point, Michael, I am all, and I also agree with Tom, we're not necessarily all agreed on the mission, but this is a big challenge.
It is.
My voters all asked for property tax relief. They didn't ask for total blowing up the education system and seeing what happens. Yeah, but I think we all know there. Oh, man.
Oh my God.
Ask and you shall receive.
When you say supervisory unions, do you also mean school districts? Because we have that unique combination in Vermont where we have supervisory unions and they're not the same thing. And
I think somebody would need to explain,
yes.
I think someone would need to explain, but in my case, our districts is now our supervisory union, and we're now pretty synced up after Act 46. We're more synced up than we were.
that is not the case for.
Oh, really? That's not, okay. Anyway, guess what, guys? We can all have copies next week and look at it, or maybe we could all get them for the weekend. Oh, today's Friday.
But can I ask?
Yes.
Yeah, anyway. That's just fine.
One thing that you could ask Mr. Adams to do would be to overlay population into each of those and just to see what it looks like.
Appreciate that.
That would be fabulous. I think if we could start looking at that would be very helpful for us to begin to envision where we're going.
Mr. Chair, can I just ask, do we expect that this committee or either committee will be mapping? Because I love this. I think my understanding is no. Or at least I personally would not like to map. I love the idea of mapping, but I don't think I have, or we have the collective time to do that before August of this summer to do it properly based on at least the testimony I heard of how long it takes to do redistricting, a process we're all extremely familiar with. So before we get into mapping, I think my main question is, do either of you think we should be mapping, or should we be starting to draft the bones of a process, have someone else start mapping?
I'm not gonna answer that question.
But someone needs to decide that.
I'm trying to answer your question. I don't want to directly answer that in a pointed way right now. What we're doing right now is we're embarrassing ourselves and understanding what the exercise is that we have in front of us, like I said before. right? Like, we're not making any hard and fast decisions on what we're doing.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I would just ask our chair then if you have a perspective on if we should do mapping or not mapping as a committee.
I will say this. In a normal governmental way, if we delegate someone else to do it, we extend the amount of time it's.
Right down.
Yes.
So I think we need to take the bull by the horns and start working.
Mhm.
Okay. Very different answer.
Okay, I got Representative Pistol, then I have the Secretary of State, then I have
Thanks.
President Stone.
I believe in the governor's proposal of his 5 districts, he showed the population of each of those districts, of the number of students that would be in each of those districts. If you look at that map, 5 districts, it has the number of students in each of those 5 districts. So there's your population of students that we're talking about.
But it would be great to see it overlaid on this.
But it's already, we don't have to go searching for the numbers, what I'm saying.
Yeah,
is
no,
the
no, it
numbers are already
exists,
there.
yeah.
Did you have something to add?
I just wanted to say something in response to Senator White, because there are 2 different tasks I would pose that need to happen in order for these new school districts to be able to exist and elect board members. One is the creation of the districts.
Yeah.
That's a map. Has some different kinds of considerations, because you might want to look at population size, you might want to look at taxing capacity or grand list or whatnot. There are many factors you might want to look at. The other part of the process is how you create wards within each of those districts. And so there's certainly, it's not a chicken and egg. You have to have a district, but you can develop the process for how you create wards in the absence of knowing how many wards you have.
Right. So we can chew gum and walk at the same time.
And we can do the 5 big districts.
I believe that your education committees will want to have some input into how many school districts there are. But you are the experts in figuring out the election-related and government organization-related peripherals to that.
Representative Stone.
Ed-related things that are, again, not in the scope of this committee that we haven't even talked about, or I think we should, because it's Ed's scope of practice is career technical centers.
Yep.
I've talked about that, and collective bargaining. How big is too big? Another thing we need to think about, and honestly, when I say we, I feel like it should be the Ed committee, because that's in their area of expertise, not ours. I understand that elections are, but as somebody who sat on Ed committee before this, those are things that they discuss and we don't. That are important.
You're here.
Yes, and just to be clear, to re-clarify what I said earlier, education reform is what came out of my mouth. The only reason I bring up districts is when I brought up districts is because that's what we've got to date. If there's something else out there, because yes, like Senator Bielanski said, taxpayers are talking about, education reform in sense of they're looking at their wallets. That's a big component of it. And if there's maybe this is too big of a bite of an apple to date. I don't know. But I mean, we got to do something. And I think we need to do something to look at this and but I haven't seen us talk or do anything different than the district concept. And how far do we dive with that? I don't know, but I hope we can in this building get together and start figuring that out soon as that's my frustration. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I'm not mad at anybody or upset with anybody. If anybody takes that personally, like I said, I don't get that way. If people want to, whatever, I got alligator skin from my world, but we've just, I hope we can do something. I really, really do. And I'm struggling, maybe I'm starting to struggle with something as anymore myself, but I know we got to do something.
Think of ops will.
Okay.
I want to be conscious of time. We're about 17 minutes before 3 o'clock here, and I know that's with the.
What's our next step?
What's that?
What's our next step? Oh, sorry, Tanya. Probably has.
I certainly appreciate that the 5 districts have populations. Those aren't broken down into the smaller entities. And with the outstanding constitutional question of whether or not different proportioned districts are constitutional, I would really still like to see this map with the overlay of the population within those districts and supervisory unions
Population by supervisory union.
and district. These districts, our existing districts, our existing entities of school governance.
Yeah.
Because I think that could help us too, to think about, you know, if ultimately what feels like the best thing to do is to have proportional districts, we can then start to think about how they get created, not from the, because looking at a mega district, I don't know, is it this little corner that has 10,000 people and that little corner that has 120? I just know the total. So I'd like to see these.
Easily add numbers to that.
Yes, that's what I'm asking for. I'm asking for whomever has the expertise to put the numbers on this map.
I expect Representative Hooper to jump up and go to the printer and bring one back to you.
Actually, I do have a poster size version of that.
With population?
In all
Enrollment.
seriousness,
Oh, enrollment would be great too, but both voting population.
if your chairs were to reach out to VCGI, that they would be able to get.
John would make this an art.
I would happily have Senate GovOps take the lead on
Oh,
this.
there you
We
go.
wanted to put time on our agenda for next week to start a mapping conversation.
Sure.
And bring it here Friday. So
Yeah.
we have it together.
Since, you know, we need to take a step forward, I'd love for us to be the ones to do it. So at least.
I wonder if starting to make the decisions about elections and timeframes might be a first step, because then maybe more information about what our education committees are thinking will emerge around mapping.
I think we do need to reach out to our education committees because I know they've invested time in this very process. So at least
Oh,
know,
okay.
I know what they're thinking.
House education has. Oh,
Yes, house education's spent a lot of time.
Representative Stone's nodding her head.
Yes.
Hold up, I got Representative Boyden, then I have Representative Hooper.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Representative Purple for being here from House Education, from the perspective from Representative Stone too, for previously being on House Education. And it would be helpful for next week to have both House and Senate here and really get some direction from them and whatever direction they're getting from either the pro tem, the speaker, the governor, whoever it may be, to just assist us in our work moving forward, because it just feels like what Representative Bynum said, we're kind of spinning in a washer of what ifs and questions. So we get started on some of the government models and then eventually the actual mapping.
I just want to encourage lawmakers, you know, all 30 senators and 150 members of the House, that we can't hide behind arguments regarding time or jurisdiction. There are committees that will take the lead on certain aspects of this policy. Education, House Education specifically, obviously has a lot of really difficult questions to navigate, hence my encouragement that we, you know, meet on Mondays. But seriously, you can't say that we're going to run out of time. We have to commit to this work until we have something to show for it. We're going into town meeting week with hardly even a direction. And we need to be completely candid with our voters about what we're doing and what we aren't doing. And I don't think that we're moving too slowly right now. I think this is healthy. And we just have to stay committed to an inch by inch, brick by brick, forward moving process that isn't dominated by politics and rhetoric. So far, so good. Let's keep it up.
Inch by inch, row.
I did hear someone ask, and I'm sorry that I might have gotten the context wrong because I was coming back in the room. I did hear someone ask about the membership in each district. So that is available on the Agency of Education website. So you can compare the proposed districts with the proposed membership and to what is current in terms of school districts and supervisory unions. So you should be able to find that on the AOE website. And also want to point people to the preliminary findings, or actually now the findings from the Commission on the Future of Public Education in Vermont. Their preliminary findings were out on December 20th, and that should all be there as well.
Lisa, when you use the word member, do you mean voter or do you mean students?
Students. And I was assuming that's what folks were interested in when they were talking about the current school districts with the proposed map overlaid on it, because that map, with the 5 districts only shows student membership.
Oh. But I think one of our challenges is students versus voters. Because quite honestly, in towns like ours, where only 25% of the population have kids in the school, 75% of Woodstock don't have kids, school-age kids. So the voters are, I think, what we've been mostly talking about are voters. So I'm not sure we have that map yet of voters overlaid.
Right.
Isn't that what you're asking for, Tanya, is
We're
voters?
asking for 2 different
Oh, yeah, that
things,
is-
because in terms of drawing the maps, for school districts, that should be student population. And in terms of elections, it should be voter population. So I don't know how that gets reconciled, and I'm looking to the Secretary of State because that's something that I was just thinking about on my walk down the hall.
I think we need them both.
Yeah, that's why I asked for both. Because exactly that. Yes.
Representative Gonzalez, your hand up.
Well, I was just gonna say that our first mission is the student and the number of students per representation should be our number 1 priority. When it comes to, for instance, 1 per 10,000 students or whatever. I think that should be our first overlay and most important. And as far as the voting districts, that comes after. Because we're really talking about the representation of students when it comes to redistricting.
Are we?
Not constitutionally.
I don't think constitutionally we are.
This is so tricky.
That's where I think our challenge is.
Well,
That's a thorny unweaving, I think we have to do a little bit of.
and if I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking aloud, that the, voting districts will encompass multiple school districts. We all know that in some way, shape, or form. So that's where we make those decisions. But regardless, the number of students per district and the number of districts, school districts, has to be determined before I think we can make our decision on voting districts, just because they may not encompass traditional patterns, and we need to know the school districts first.
Yes. Great.
Just thinking loud.
Well, let me suggest that Matt and I will try to get both of those pieces of data by next Friday and see from there.
I have John's contact.
That'd be great.
No, thank you for everyone's time. Thank you very much. Well, Madam Secretary. We really appreciate all the insight, perspective, just lived experience that you have with this stuff. And the ability to.
Got one funny story to tell you. Remember one time
Yeah.
I was working on a map, on a house map on the east side of the state. I had this brilliant idea of how to combine towns to make the population really work. And it was going to put Newbury in with Bradford. And I called up somebody on the east side of the state and said, that'll never work. We've had a football rivalry with that town for generations. No way.
That was my house district.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'd ask the members of the Senate Government Operations, don't go to the bathroom, don't go anywhere, except go back to the committee room. We have a bill to vote out. So please don't leave. Please just literally get out.
Government
Walk into the hall.
Oh, no.